Okay, greetings everybody. I'm so excited for tonight. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. Really the guts of this series that we've been putting on, which is getting to know our local candidates. So if you're new here tonight, if you haven't been to one of our previous sessions in this series, I'm looking at the list. I think most of you have. This is the fourth night of a 7-session series called Voting to End Poverty. So our first 3 sessions, we had really great guest speakers who taught us about all kinds of different poverty issues in our province, what the state of things were, what they're looking for coming up in this election. And then our next 3, maybe 4 sessions are going to focus on getting one-on-one intimate evening with the candidates, our local candidates. So we are so excited, and I'm so grateful to all of the candidates for giving up their time, for joining us, and for kind of doing a little bit something different. So I'm really excited that they're all going to be here. So I'm not going to take up too much time tonight because we have lots of great questions for the candidates. And tonight we have Erin Horvath from the NDP party going to introduce herself to us. So just before we dive into meeting Erin and the questions tonight, so we are going to be asking Erin, or I am going to be asking Erin, a whole bunch of questions that were developed from our participants in the last 3 sessions and also from the prompt members themselves. So lots of good discussion we've had in the last 3 sessions. People have emailed me questions. They've been submitted in the chats of previous sessions. So we copied all of those, we took track of all of them and kind of jostled them down to the most common threads. And all of the questions have been provided to the candidates in advance. So all the candidates are getting the same questions and they're all getting the chance to have an idea first of what we will be asking them. So that's kind of the format for the evening. We're going to hear from Erin directly about who she is, what she's passionate about and what her party stands for. And then we'll dive into the questions that you have put together. So I'm very excited for tonight. You'll see that the chat is not functioning tonight and you don't have the ability to unmute yourself. That is because we are packing a lot into 1 hour. So we really have to just focus on Erin. It's all about Erin tonight and what she has to say. So we're really giving her the floor tonight and giving her kind of uninterrupted time for us to get to know her. So I will unmute Erin or ask her to unmute and she can come on and introduce herself.
I think I need to be also made to show my video. Can you do that?
I think
you just
so.
Want to hear me, not see me?
No, we want to see you.
Okay. Well,
can you start it now?
Let's try.
Oh, gotcha.
Here I am.
Welcome. So I'm going to mute myself and turn my camera off, and I'll give you some time to introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, first of all, good evening. I really appreciate everybody choosing to come from the beautiful outdoors into this space, so that's how we can talk a little bit, or I can talk to you about some of the things that are coming up in this election and the wonderful questions that were created. So why don't I start first by introducing myself? So like Megan said, I'm Erin Horvath. A few things about me that are more personal in nature, and then I will mention things about the NDP, which is the party that I represent. So I'm currently a solo woman of 2 teenage sons who are 15 and 17, and I love them dearly, and I co-parent them with their wonderful dad who lives about 1 minute away from me. So we enjoy a little bit of an unconventional family arrangement, and it really works for us, and we're loving it. So those are my peeps, my family. I live here in Huntsville. I'm the co-founder of New Vision Unlimited, which is a not-for-profit community development organization, and I've operated that since 2006. And under that umbrella, we have a couple different enterprises, and one of them is called the Hub Muskoka here in Huntsville. And it's a business that, a social enterprise that services 125 odd businesses. And one of the cool things that we do is not just provide space for people to do their business, but we also try to solve some of the, understand and solve some of the community issues that we face. So sometimes that might be looking at things like housing, sometimes it might be sexual violence, variety of issues in between. We've done some things on water preservation. So we have quite a culture that's focused on social justice. The other thing I do is I'm the social and environmental justice lead for charity. So a lot of my work in justice issues on those fronts as well. Something that I do that's kind of for fun, but I love it. Megan, you said to talk about my passion. So I'm putting it in here that I'm also a dancer and I teach dance. And that's one of the things that makes my heart sing every week, is getting to hang out with my little guys and doing things that are light, you know, not problem focused, but just joyful. And I really, truly love it. A little bit of background of who I am, because I think it does help to frame a little bit about how I see things. So in my growing up years, I had a mom and a dad, and I had some sisters as well. My dad was killed in a car accident when I was 11. And of course, that was traumatic beyond words, and changed the kind of the essence of how my family functions. My dad was the primary care, well, I guess earner. My mom did a lot of the care and my dad did a lot of the earning. And with my dad gone, then my family was experiencing quite a shift, with my mom going back to work full time as an early childhood educator. And then later she owned a gift store. And I was raised by my mom then and my grandparents, who played a very big role in my life. All of my family has been working class family. On my dad's side, that side of the family immigrated from Hungary and were very, very, very poor when they started out. But I learned a lot from them about how to live off the land, growing all of the food. They were homesteaders as well. So that part has stuck with me. And then on the other side, my grandpa was a construction worker, and my other grandpa was a janitor, and my grandma was a seamstress. So that's kind of like my background. My dad was a police officer for a time and a security guard. So I've grown up with just a variety of different kinds of people doing things in my life, but always working really hard as best as they could. And then of course that experience with having a single mom and beginning to work really, really young myself, grade 7, in order to help support my necessities. So my mom paid for the roof over our heads, but then I paid for most of everything else that I needed when I was about grade 7 onward. I have Indigenous sisters, one that's living and one that died from a drug and alcohol related accident when she was in her early 20s. And I've spent over 25 years living and working alongside First Nations folks. That's a really big part of who I am and something that shapes how I see the world, even though I'm not Indigenous myself. Just being in and around that lived experience for so many years, like over 25 years, has shown me things that I think I would not have been able to see or understand otherwise. Currently in my life, I have 2 close people in my life that are dealing with serious mental health challenges. That's really, really challenging for me and for them. And one living with a really, really intense addiction that we're trying to get some help and support for. So yeah, feels really personal, feels a little bit raw to talk about that kind of stuff. So I'm going to just leave it at that and just know that that's something that is a part of my life and we're trying to figure it out, even as this election campaign is unfolding. So as I grew up, I put myself through school by working many, many jobs. My mom supported as she could, and I feel like it helped to shape a lot of who I become and how I raise my kids. So with all that said, why the NDP, right? You might have a clue from some of that information why it makes sense for me to represent the NDP. Most broadly, it's because the NDP focuses on improving the lives of all people, not just the wealthy people, and really specifically by saying, how do we raise the tide for all of us, but those at the experiencing the most poverty in particular, how do we bring that floor up for everyone? Part of that too then is that it's not just like a one-off or two-off things. If you start to notice the NDP platform, it's a comprehensive look at how do we improve the quality of life, the affordability of life, how do we protect the environment, how do we grow in sustainable ways, all looking at that together. And for me, part of the way I see the world is kind of like a system and everything's connected. And so I really look for that when I'm looking for a party. I want to know that the stuff that they're talking about makes sense, like when you look at it as a whole. So I see that with the NDP. One part of the NDP that also makes sense is the support for small businesses. So we've seen in our riding that the big box stores and the multinationals were able to stay open during this pandemic, but our small businesses were closed. And that's a huge loss for our riding and for our worker population as we kind of adjust to that massive loss of income in our riding. The other reason why I can support the NDP, which is close to home, is its stance with First Nations peoples. So there's a firm commitment to work nation to nation governance structure to governance structure, and that is really a big difference between how other parties are doing it, and it makes quite a difference when you talk about things like poverty reduction. So that and the equity for all people, you can see that the NDP tries to have candidates that are representative, that are diverse, and that means a whole lot to me as well. It's a privilege to be a part of a diverse team and to see different kinds of people and faces and ideas coming forward. And then the last bit is the dedication to addressing the climate change. That to me it's a deal breaker, just as First Nations issues and equity and diversity are. So that's a little bit of who I am. I'll leave it at that. And Megan, did you want to ask the questions?
Sure. Yep.
I got a sneak peek at the questions, so I actually know some of what they are, but.
Well, I hope you have them memorized.
And I was part of your prompt meeting, so I even
Yes.
heard some of them as they were being created. So
yeah. That was very helpful. Thank you. That gives us a lot of insight into where you're coming from and where you want to go. So that was really lovely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So our first question is not really topical. It's a big general question, but I think something that came up in several of our sessions, which was kind of general about, how your politics and your party developed their platform. So how did you and your party identify our community's most pressing needs? And how do you engage the community to guide your work?
So I think this is a wonderful question, because when you talk about systems-based change, you need to be knowing how many perspectives are being representative, right? It's not just about one or two people having what they think is a great idea and then putting that forward. So the NDP has formed on an ongoing way meaningful relationships with a variety of stakeholders. So we're not just talking, from the top of our heads about what would be great ideas. These are like ongoing reciprocal exchanges with people that are in positions of leadership, but also with people with lived experience, which I think really matters. Some of our candidates also have lived experience. That's part of the diversity. So it's not just, say talking about Indigenous people's poverty. There's Indigenous people running, right? There's people in those leadership positions, municipal councillors. The one thing I would say though is that all parties need to become better at figuring out how people who are living in poverty can also run for office, because it's a really difficult thing to do. And I want to just put that up front that, there's that commitment to connect with all different kinds of folks, but I would love to see, more leadership on the political levels of people with that kind of lived experience. So talking to the stakeholders, there was a call out to our ridings and riding associations to say, hey, and this was quite a while ago, saying we're working on policy, what's current, what's the issues on the ground. And so we had an opportunity there to start to connect with people and to ask what are some of the things. Many people on our riding association are involved on an ongoing basis, not just once or twice, ongoing basis with, justice for workers, various union type, environmental, social justice, various things on an ongoing basis. So that's something that's really important, is that we're trying to as a riding association, stay engaged. And then also too, many of our people on our riding association are with lived experience as well. So we're bringing that to policy. Personally, I attend events, protests. I speak with people as often as I can, which is very often because of my work. So like, for example, with the national organization I work with, we did a forum because that organization wanted to become more inclusive. So we did one on people living with disabilities and also with classism. So, you know, that was like a plethora of interviews that I did personally with people to try to understand. Just since this election has started, a campaign, I've been speaking with the ODSP, OW caseworker, a community living executive director, and purposefully spending lots of time in areas that would be considered perhaps low income and talking directly with folks there. So that's some of the efforts that I'm making. And then I mentioned that people in my own life are directly impacted, you know, living on disability, ODSP, or with addictions and what have you. So I feel like that that's another kind of up close and personal way of engaging, if that kind of makes any sense. It does inform kind of how I see things in general.
Yeah. Having been engaged with certain systems, you have some idea how some of them work just from your personal, touching things.
And over 25 years, a lot of the work that I've done has been with people, you know, like sexual violence survivors, people trying to leave domestic situations to go to shelters, not finding those, you know, what they need, the support, trying to help my own nephew get into treatment. Like, good luck with that, right? So there's, yeah, that's kind of some of my frustration that I heard kind of echoed in the PROMPT sessions that I attended before.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to a couple topical questions. So first is we're going to talk about housing. So this is an issue I know in my work that I hear constantly about rental supply, and at PROMPT meetings, it's impacted our members personally, really, really invasively in their lives, the lack of rental supply. So in Parry-Sound Muskoka, the whole riding really has seen dramatic reduction in the number of rental units available in the past few years. So there was a kind of two things that impacted that. First, a lot of long-term rentals were converted to short-term vacation rentals, Airbnbs. So that really reduced rental supply. And then more recently, during the eviction, a lot of low-cost, long-term tenancies have been ended due to purchasers' own use evictions. So this is where, you know, a single family home, rental home has been bought by someone probably out from out of our area, moves to our area, and that family that was renting gets evicted, but there is nowhere for them to go. So does your party intend to support urgent construction of purpose-built rental units? And if so, how is this going to be achieved and funded?
So yes, absolutely. This is one of what I was talking about, a comprehensive package. This is part of that. So I'll answer the how right up front. So the NDP stance is to freeze taxes on low and middle income and raise the taxes on the ultra rich. So that's very, very rich, well over what any of us would be making. And that helps to balance out some of the profit that's been made by the upper echelon of folks during this pandemic, and then offset it so that we're not as impacted. It also creates that extra money that we need in order to do some targeted builds. So there's a thing called the Homes You Can Afford, which is a comprehensive plan tackling the housing crisis from multiple angles. And it's grounded in the fundamental kind of foundations of working to create what regular folks would need for housing, as well as below market or non-market housing, right? Which we would call, like, you know, social housing or geared to income housing. So in a nutshell, there's a plan to build 100,000 new affordable homes over 10 years. And those ones will be charged rents that are geared to income. So that's part of it. And then another 150,000 over 10 years that are new non-market homes. So that's charging below market rents. and then building 60,000 new supporting housing units, and then repairing 260,000 existing social housing units. So a big repair. There's a recognition that that's been like neglected for years and years and years by conservative and liberal governments. So there's a need to bring that up to standards. And then also buying and rehabilitating existing privately owned rental buildings and converting them into non-market homes to the best that we're able. So an important part too of this and making it affordable is that these would be, all the new builds would be energy efficient to meet the target of a net zero by 2030. And that matters because the more energy efficient it is, the less the ongoing bills are for electricity and heat and what have you. So that's an important part. Does that answer your question about that? There's
Yeah, I think so.
Rent and how that will be tackled, but that's kind of the plan to get more houses into the market.
Gotcha. So there's a plan to build purpose-built rental homes. Yeah.
Yes.
Hundreds of thousands of units.
Yes. And in our riding, like, just to be clear, some parties will say, we're going to build lots of houses, we're going to ramp it all up. We have actually been doing decently as a country and as a province, even as a riding, in building houses. It's just not the houses that real worker folks live in.
Yes.
Right. It's oftentimes cottages, big houses. So that's the difference there, is targeted specifically.
So that maybe is a good segue to our next question, because they're kind of related. So both federally and provincially, many efforts to address the housing crisis have focused on affordable home ownership. But for many of our community members experiencing poverty, affordable and available rental housing is a very urgent need, and home ownership is not an option. So what does your party, or have they defined what is considered affordable rental housing? And how do you plan to provide more affordable rental availability, which I think you covered in terms of providing more availability? You've kind of covered that, I think, but what about what do you consider affordable in terms of rental housing?
Yes, we can definitely talk about that. So 30% of your income would be considered, you should not be spending more than that when it comes to housing. So that's kind of the benchmark that we would be using as a reference point. Shall I talk a little bit about what's going to be done then to control the rent prices?
Sure, certainly. Yeah.
That's kind of part of that nut that we got to crack, right? Okay, so bringing back rental control for all apartments, and then ensuring that you pay what the last tenant paid by scrapping vacancy decontrol. So that's a really important part of it. Creating a portable housing benefit as recommended by the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association and the Cooperative Housing Federation of Canada to help families that are struggling to pay rent and afford the basic necessities. And I think that's upwards of to help 311,000 families. So there's, quite a pot of money there. We know that there needs to be a fix to the landlord-tenant board and restore the right in-person hearing. We have to end the unfair evictions blitz to make sure that tenants and landlords can get prompt and fair hearings before a board. So we know that that's also really helpful. We need to end the rent evictions, which means renters won't face unfair rent hikes or eviction as a result of renovations. And kind of on a broad level, dealing with speculators. So increasing the non-resident speculation taxes to 20%, similar to BC, and then having a non-resident tax so that it just offsets. It helps to ensure that we're keeping more homes available for rent to regular folks, and not having people kind of scoop them up, hold on to them, use them for investment, but not circulating and making them available to the public. I think I got everything there on my list. All right. I should mention one other thing is that the NDP also looks at Indigenous housing as a separate sort of thing. Should I mention that as well? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yep.
So here you can see some of that tone of nation to nation. So support for Indigenous by Indigenous housing strategy to create 22,000 Indigenous owned and operated homes. but not just, imposing that, but working with Indigenous nations to say, how should this look? What should it be like? And expand the successful rights-based housing first model and deliver 30,000 new homes with supports over the next 10 years.
And would that be specifically on reserve or off reserve, or is it just for Indigenous peoples wherever they may be?
Yes, yeah, because Indigenous folks can be in communities that are, urban as well.
Okay, thanks.
That's all I can think of for that particular one.
All right. So as I'm sure you know, and I think you've touched on when you were discussing your work with businesses, that our riding really depends on a robust seasonal tourism industry. And of course, with that, also the workers that keep that tourism industry functioning. So currently, especially in the last year or two, rent rates have skyrocketed in our area to about the same and sometimes more than areas of the GTA, but we don't have the same year-round work opportunities necessarily available. So how will you, or does your party have a plan to ensure that areas across the province that rely on seasonal tourism industry, how will those workers have access to affordable year-round housing to continue to be able to provide labor for these economies?
Right. So some of this answer is kind of coming from some of the other ones that I have said or I'm about to say. Sure. So in general, you can see we're making efforts to increase the supply of housing that's available. That you can see that we've talked about, we need to do a portable housing allowance to make up for when folks are coming short on basic necessities and paying rent at the same time. So there's that kind of piece covered. And then in a little bit, I'm going to talk about the acknowledgement that the rates for OW and ODSP need to go up as well to create more money, and also talking about minimum wage in a short while. So all of that has to come together. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, and this is, I guess I'm wearing my small business hat when I'm talking about this, is that we recognize that we need to create more full season employment, and or do some more planning strategically where businesses that are creating shoulder economies for themselves or pairing up with businesses. So this is something that we actually do through the work that I do, is try to figure out how to help businesses stay afloat year round, because that matters to them too, right? They want to retain their employees because it's a pain in the butt to lose everybody and then try to rehire them back. So there's some effort being made there to create what they call shoulder season industries. And then another part is that through the NDP, there's something called the New Green Democratic Deal. And that's looking at, how do we create more jobs that are in the green sector, green manufacturing? I would love to advocate for that kind of growth in our economy. Let's do some green manufacturing here in Parry-Sound Muskoka. Why not? And those are good, all season, good paying jobs, right? So starting to get more of those things happening. The other thing that if you were reading the newspapers recently, like as recently as this last week, some of the employment places were talking about how they're working with businesses to try to help them tackle some of the challenges. I know here in our small business center, we've had people go and pick up employees, they bring them to work, because that was the hurdle that needed to be figured out in order for them to be able to work consistently. And so I think they purchased a vehicle and sent somebody around each day, and that was, included. Childcare, as another thing that, some businesses are trying to figure out in order to make it easier to attract their employees and keep them. So again, not exactly tackling, well, what are we going to do during the off season, but it's kind of like coming at it from what can small businesses do to try to keep and retain their employees that they do have, right? To try to keep them with them through the whole entire season.
Gotcha. So eliminate the need for, seasonal shifts in housing availability by reducing, seasonal focus economies, like extending the year.
Yes, and this is something that if you want to talk about where small businesses are aligning it with workers' interest right now is the small business community that I represent a lot. Like we were talking about, like we're not just about tourism here in Parry-Sound Muskoka. You know, we've had representatives in office from the Conservative Party that for 20 something years and haven't managed to create it to be anything more than you know, what it is. So we want to do more than that. And I would say that we're certainly capable of it, but we need that leadership to show us, you know, how to get there.
Okay. All right, so let's move on. You mentioned social assistance. So we have just a couple questions there because I think, you know, we could spend a whole night talking about social assistance because, you know, certainly this is a big topic for PROMPT members, and a big part of my job as well is the system is bad. But there's two kind of main issues that have been identified, which is how punitive it is and how like it is not enough money to live off of. So that's where we're really going to drill down into those questions. So just for those, you know, on the line that may not be familiar with Ontario Works or ODSP, just to give you some insight into how much you really, you know, receive from these programs. So a single person right now in Ontario receives a maximum of $733 per month, which is supposed to cover housing costs and basic needs. So that's a total annual income, if you're into math, of $8,800 a year, which is disgusting. And a single person right now on ODSP, so that's our disability support program, receives $1,169 per month, which is just about $14,000 a year total income. So we heard from one of our presenters at one of our sessions that the 2020 market basket measure for the poverty line was considered to be just over $24,000, and the deep poverty line was considered to be $16,000. So given the rapid rise of inflation, even since those numbers were developed, and that both of the OW and ODSP numbers fall well below even the deep poverty line, you know, does your party intend to raise social assistance rates? And if so, by how much? And will rates be pegged to inflation?
So absolutely. We do know, and we are raising those rates. But the first thing I want to mention is that for the NDP, this is something when, you know, if you look in our platform, there's entire sections on this. This matters so much to address this issue well. So what you'll see is a statement here. I just want to read it to you. So lifting everyone out of poverty. That's the goal. We will establish a system that raises people out of poverty no later than the end of our first term. We'll immediately begin to work with all stakeholders on delivering an evidence-based approach to setting rates at a level that recognizes the real cost of essentials like food and rent. So just to point out there, that's working with stakeholders on determining what that is, and increasing immediately the ODSP and OW rates to support that. Immediately, so like upon election, immediately, they'll go up 20%. Just as a start, and legislate that they are at minimum being indexed to inflation. What I was encouraged when I read this was that there is like an understanding that the goal is to move everyone out of that poverty line, right? So that's the intention, that's where we're heading. And then the other bit is working with the federal government to deliver a Canada disability benefit that does not result in a loss of services to recipients, and that measurably improves the lives of Ontarians with disabilities. So it's kind of like looking at it from the federal level, from the provincial level, starting immediately, working with stakeholders, and then finding that, you know, that commitment of raising out of poverty. I think that that's a really important one, is the all-round wraparound with the housing component as well, looked at it as kind of like the whole package of how we're approaching it. You may hear, you know, some parties, the Green Party, for example, said, well, we're going to raise it 50%. But unless you have a plan that says how you're going to do that and all these other supports that will go in and around it, it's a wonderful aspirational goal. The NDP would say, yes, we want to at least do that and match it, but we want to work with stakeholders to make sure we know that we are meeting it. If that kind of makes sense. So it's saying immediately you can expect that it's going to go up 20%, and then quite soon after that, it said by the end of the first term, to know, all right, here we found it because we worked with our stakeholders, we know where that level is, and we're going to meet that goal. I encourage you to take a look at if you're interested in you know, party platforms, but look at the amount of words. It's several pages long where it's talking about this commitment and all the details around how that will be, you know, brought about.
I love policy. I'll read platforms all day long.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I think you might be an exception.
Yeah, it's not thrilling, but it is to me. Okay, thank you. So that was basically a yes. You have immediate intentions of raising the rates by at least 20%, and it's going to be pegged to inflation, and that's just the starting point.
And the federal government part as well, too, right? So trying to get it from multi angles, and that absolute commitment to say, no, we get that this has to be. We have to find what that poverty rate is definitively with our stakeholders and meet that.
Got it. Okay, so this is from 2020. So this is from the Vital Signs report. So in 2020, 2,500 households in Muskoka, and that's just Muskoka. We don't have the numbers for Parry-Sound, or didn't get it by today. So 2,500 households in Muskoka were receiving OW or ODSP. So in our community consultations that we did for this series, a lot of folks express frustrations with the really restrictive and punitive Ontario Works and ODSP systems, and specifically with the clawbacks of any outside income. So these programs both have financial penalties for earning employment income, living with a partner, going to school. And one that's most astounding is that loans are considered income rather than debts and are deducted dollar for dollar from any benefits. So it is truly impossible to find any way that you can improve your situation at these poverty rates that they're issuing. So many people expressed that this is demeaning, and they were feeling like it was impossible to get ahead. So what changes, I mean, you've talked about it somewhat, but what changes do you think are necessary other than raising the rates to improve the social assistance programs?
So before I mention what the NDP will do, I just want to say that this is something that I'm dealing with my own family members right now, and it's really frustrating. One of them's on disability, and they can intermittently work, but not always, and just the challenge that creates. And so I can empathize that and believe that this is a real problem, because I'm experiencing it with my family members at this time as we try to figure things out for them. So generally speaking, the NDP wants to overhaul the broken social assistance system through meaningful consultation and co-design with social assistance clients. So it's not just, you know, again, trying to guess, but using our network of connections and folks with lived experience to say, here's what we want to see different. Another part of it is the Ford government has been privatizing aspects of it. And when I talked to the OW and ODSP worker, she was saying about the challenges that presents, that our area has been deemed as a pilot project to not actually allow people to be in a stable way on ODSP or OW, but to just kind of like try to give them temporary fixes. And in the meantime, keep sending them to the private employment places. But she's commenting that as a social worker, she's limited then on providing some of the emotional care and support that she feels is needed. So some of these privatization schemes are not in the best interests of people. And so, you know, reversing some of those. We've identified through our connections that these rules that you said are just unfair. So we'll update the ODSP Act to ensure people living with disabilities are not subjected to a different set of standards than those without disabilities. And they give an example in the policy that says we'll change the definition of spouse in the ODSP Act to align the timeline by which a person on ODSP is considered common law with a person not receiving disability support. So these are just examples of recognizing that, yes, there needs to be an overhaul there. It states specifically in our platform that all recommendations from the Onley report will be implemented. And a little thing under it says that we'll honor the commitment Ontario made when it passed the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act and work to urgently implement all recommendations to ensure Ontario is on the path to being fully accessible. So that's another aspect of it. They also specifically say fix the assisted devices program. So we'll increase staffing and modernize the service delivery so people with disabilities do not have to wait months for critically important devices. And then stop forcing people to reapply at 18. So we'll end that practice. These are just a few things. Again, you can take a look at the very comprehensive section in the, it's named Fixing Ontario's Social Safety Net and ensuring people with disabilities live with a great life. That's the title of it.
And where is that document available?
You can find it online. I can
on the NDP website. It's easy to find. Okay, is it part of? Just
Google Ontario NDP platform PDF, it should come up.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So lots to fix. We're hearing lots to fix. Lots to change.
I should mention something else though that kind of goes alongside this, because I also mentioned the housing, but mental health supports under the NDP would come under OHIP. So it's, again, part of that comprehensive package we were talking about that does make a difference in our lives, as well as addiction support. So upping and increasing that, it's, you know, it's not exactly what you're asking for, but I think it's like, it's part of.
It's an extension of the benefits that would be available to everyone, not just folks that are on OW or ODSP.
Absolutely. Yeah, all folks. But with that, then, you know, pharmacare, dental care, these sort of things are something that the NDP would be rolling out, and those would be absolutely free for people in the lower income side, and then kind of a sliding scale for those up as we go higher in the income brackets.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we're going to move on to our little last category here, which is labor and employment. And you know, we've sort of, all of these issues are really interconnected. So we've touched on a few of these things, but you did mention we were going to talk about minimum wage. So let's do that. So we know that research shows in the past when minimum wage has increased in Ontario, number of jobs increased, local spending increased, the racial wage gap and the gender wage gap shrank, and public determinants of health improved. So is there a plan with your party to increase minimum wage? When, by how much, and will it be pegged to inflation?
Right. So yes, absolutely. And the raising it to $20 per hour by 2026. And yes, pegging it to inflation. And then the kind of the scheme would be in $1 an hour increments per year. Does that make sense? I don't know if I said that as clearly as I could have, but starting October 1st, it would go up. And then the following year, it would go up another dollar, until it's at $20 an hour, and then it would be pegged to inflation. That gives our small businesses an opportunity to adjust, and then it gives us a consistent trajectory. That's kind of two side things to this when it comes to income. One is to restart the basic income pilot project that was ended. So that starts to, give us a reference point of, what we need to be at in terms of having a robust enough income to support and create stability in life. And then the other bit that's kind of related to this in an adjacent way is a tax freeze on low and middle income, which I kind of mentioned before, but I will just mention again so that it's, understanding that immediately that would happen, and it would be for 4 years. So that will, help to put more money in our pockets as well.
Okay, thanks. So there's a method for addressing that. That's the basic income pilot that would be restarted immediately?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I think that's a really excellent, because it kind of got interrupted, right? It was halfway through and then it got interrupted, and we want to see the results of something like that and see how it goes. And we know that the impacts were very positive. So trying to understand, in this day and age, post-pandemic, what are the rates, what would work, what's the best way to do it. So we'll test that out.
Okay.
Mhm.
This is our last question for tonight. So I think you mentioned actually that your riding association does have some folks that are involved in the Justice for Workers campaign. So some of this is going to come from that campaign. So labor organizations and workers' rights campaign in Ontario, like the Ontario Federation of Labor and the Justice for Workers campaign, are calling for significant improvements to legislated workplace conditions and benefits for workers in this province beyond wages. So these include 2 weeks of, the campaigns are a little bit different, but these are some of the scope that have been asked for. So these include 2 weeks of employer paid sick days, equal pay for equal work, and drug, dental, and health benefits for all employees. So does your party support these improvements, or what changes do you believe are necessary to ensure well-being of workers in our community?
Mm-hmm. So I think this is kind of what the NDP is known for, right? Is the support to workers. It's a party that was created to support the working class and to push back against some of the norms of the establishment. So we owe a lot to workers for creating, the 5-day work week with the 2-day weekend, all this sort of thing. So the NDP recognizes that history, and we're always pushing for better rights. So yes, 10 permanent paid personal emergency leave days. So that's, including, if you have a sick child or whatever it is you need to be looking after. And then an additional 14 on top if it's a pandemic. So there's, proper ability to take sick days there. Yes to equal pay for equal work, which includes the fair treatment for temp workers, gig workers, these sort of things. Fair scheduling. Creating an Ontario benefits to cover all workers. So that would follow the person, not the job. And that would include health and dental benefits, and it would be under the province. And this is a good thing for small businesses because then they have a bit of a savings too, right? So if that was something they were putting out for, now they don't have to do that. So it's a win for them as well. We want to try a pilot project for the 4-day work week and see how that goes. I like the idea of pilot projects because it gives you data that you can then adjust and see, do we like that? Does that work? Is it beneficial for us? Yes or no, that kind of thing, right? We want to strengthen and enforce Employment Standards Act so workers cannot be fired without cause. Removing barriers to join a union. So we'll make it so that any workplace can unionize when 55% of workers sign a card saying they want to join a union. Let's see if there's other here. Fix WSIB to ensure it's for workers, not for big corporations, and that's specifically repealing Section 6 of Bill 27. And it says here, ensuring that surpluses are used towards clearing the backlog of claims and helping injured workers. Do you want me to say a few more things about WSIB, or is that kind of too off topic here?
No, I think WSIB is an important part of our workers' protections. If there are changes that you want to see, you can totally cover those.
Okay. So we'll proactively enforce health and safety and increase the number of jobs covered under the Employment Standards and the Workplace Safety and Insurance Act. And then we'll end deeming. So we will stop the WSIB from deeming workers to have jobs that don't exist and then cutting their benefits. It's an important part. And when it came to strikes, preventing strike violence, we will enact anti-scab legislation and other measures to encourage swift resolution of workplace job actions.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Deeming is a wild ride. That is one thing that not a lot of people know about on WSIB, that if they think that you're fit to do a job that they could randomly select, they will deduct that from your WSIB as if you were receiving that income. It is such a bizarre system, and some of the outcomes that we've seen are almost like comedic. They're so wrong. Like, you just what do you do with that? So I'm happy to hear that. So that is all of our questions that we put together. And you did great for time, so good work. And thank you again so much for joining us and giving us all that information. As much as I love to read platforms, this is much more enjoyable, and I'm sure for most people this is preferable to than wading through documents and get into the guts of things. So a lot of information in a short amount of time. So I really, really appreciate you coming tonight. Yeah. Do you want to say any closing words?
Just to thank you again for taking the time to come and to talk with me. If you have friends, family members that are interested in knowing more about the NDP, please encourage them to reach out. If you yourself want to talk with me more, feel free to reach out. Do you have information that you can give them, Megan, to reach me?
So I can send a follow-up email to all the participants. Maybe, can I use the chat? Anyway, I'll send a follow-up email to everyone that's registered with Erin's contact information.
Okay.
Yeah, will that work?
Yeah, that's fine. I can say it out loud too if anyone wants to write it down. It's just Erin.Horvath at OntarioNDP.ca.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So thanks again.
And I can also give you my cell phone number if you want that.
Sure.
I was just saying you can also contact me on my cell phone if you'd like.
Okay.
So it's 807.
Yep.
737 0019.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you. So I'll send that out to everybody for anyone who did not write that down. So that is it for tonight. Next week, so that's the 17th at the same time, and I'll send out call-in information again for that. We have the candidate for the Green Party, Matt Richter, is going to be joining us, and he will be answering the same questions. So it'll be really interesting to be at both and to see the differences between the platforms. I know Erin highlighted a few tonight that we might be expecting, so we'll see what Matt Richter has to say. So thank you again, Erin. It was a great night, and everybody go Leafs go. I guess it's the Leafs game. So good night, everybody.
Thank you.
And vote.
Yes, definitely go out and vote.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.